All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I would like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Marla Billinghurst. I will be chairing the meeting this morning. With me on the panel today are Ms. Diane Knight and Mr. Ron Merritt. The secretary for the hearing today will be Ms. Crystal Harland, and the city assessors will be Nathan Kupfer and Mr. Jonathan Spacek. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you may leave the meeting. Today, we will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision, and the Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today, and the session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 2 and 6 through 8 on our docket this morning. Mrs. Harland, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony.
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Assessor, would you please state your full name?
Nathan Kupfer.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, thank you for standing. Would you please state your full name?
My name is Jared Story.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The first matter we will be hearing on the docket this morning is number 2. That's 212 McDermott Avenue. Mr. Assessor, please proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is file number 24-2371. The roll number is 1306-087-0000. Street address is 212 McDermott Avenue, and the owner is Mayberry Holdings Limited. This is a downtown commercial office building with an original age of construction of 1901. It has our C character zoning. The land area is 3,100 square feet, and the leasable area is 7,260 feet. This is spread out over 2 stories as well as some basement area. We have a 2025 modeled assessment for this property at $1,343,000, which I'm going to recommend be confirmed today. Pages 2 and 3 of my brief provide some photos and maps of the subject property so you can get an orientation of how this property is located. It's facing onto McDermott Avenue. It's in between Main Street and Arthur, so quite close to where we are currently located. Page 4 of my brief indicates the subject sale history. As you can see, the property hasn't transacted in over 20 years. Page 5 of my brief has our income value workup for this property. So you can see we have the two areas split here between the above ground space and the basement space. That's generally how we model these buildings. Like I said, this it's suburban office, OFS, due to the fact that it's under 4 stories in height, but it is located downtown. We have a blended rent rate here, $93,770. Over the total square footage is 7,260 square feet of $12.92 rounded. Vacancy rate of 11% is being applied, 3% expenses, and an $8 shortfall rate. And a capitalization of 5.55% is how we arrive at our value of $1,343,000. Below that, I've included rent comparables for your reference. Looking at this property, I would suggest the comparables number 2 and number 4, located on Gary Street and Fort Street, are likely our best measurements for this property, given the fact that they're constructed also in the early 1900s, like the subject property is, and they're quite close by, just being on the south side of Portage. This subject property is, of course, just on the north side of Portage, but not far away. Page 6 of my brief has an income value summary. Again, there's only one stream, one classification for this property, so it's all pretty straightforward. All the same values that I've discussed here are included in the summary, deriving that value of $1,343,000. Pages 7 and 8 of my brief pertain to capitalization rates. This is all market data here, so we provide Colliers, CBRE, and Cushman Wakefield's capitalization rates. Of course, OFS, suburban office, is included as one of the rates. As you can see, there's suburban A and suburban B. And generally speaking, these capitalization rates range from a low of about 6% to a high of about 8%, according to this market data. The city has rates between about 5.25 and 6.75 at the 20th and 80th percentile. As I said, this property is being modeled at 5.55%. Pages 9 and 10 of my brief include the income and expense summary, which was submitted by the property owner. They've indicated to us that the property is fully owner occupied, so we have no leases to use as reference to our rates. However, they have included their expense information and complied with our request for information, so we have no issues there. Beyond that, pages 11 onwards are photo evidence, supporting evidence of our comparable properties. Again, I would point you to comparables number 2 and number 4 as being our best approximations for this one in terms of the age of the building and the proximity. And that's all the information I have on this property. So again, I'd like to confirm that our 2025 assessed value of $1,343,000 should be confirmed today, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Yes, I do, Madam Chair. Thank you. Mr. Cover, have you visited this property?
I haven't, no.
Okay. And just to confirm, the model is, the assessment is completely model derived, so there's been no adjustments, no overrides, anything of that nature. Is that correct?
No overrides or adjustments that I'm aware of.
Okay. Now, can we agree though that I don't disagree that broadly this property would be considered office, but indeed it has more of a retail use at this stage. Is that a fair comment from your understanding?
My understanding is it's Mayberry Holdings operates some sort of art exhibits. I'm not sure if they also sell art through there. Again, I haven't visited the property.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of the first page, and Madam Chair, this is a a question of cap rate only, so I'll limit my questions to cap rate if that is satisfactory.
Okay,
Mr. Kupfer, the actual year built of 1901 and the effective year built of 1972, which of those years is germane to the output of the model? So what does the model use to determine the value? Do they suggest that it's a building from 1901, or do they use the effective age of 1972?
To my knowledge, both would be taken into account in the model. The effective year of 1972 would influence the outputs, of course.
Okay, and what precipitated that adjustment? Is that simply a sort of to the assessor's discretion, or is there some methodology to how that effective year is applied?
There is. It generally corresponds to an inspection and a review of permits and alterations that will have been done to the property. I haven't personally done them in this case, so I can't speak to why that exact effective age was chosen.
Okay, and can we agree that this property has a heritage designation?
I saw that in your brief, Mr. Story. I really don't have any information on it, though.
Okay, and just as a broad concept from the assessment department, does a property with a heritage designation on it, does that have any bearing or any effect to how the model outputs the eventual assessed value?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Okay, moving on to page 5. Obviously the 5.55 cap rate is our point of contention here. So when I look at the city's chart, it's suggesting that downtown B, this is not a downtown B, but at a minimum that should be 7%. So does that 5.55 not seem extraordinarily low to you?
I'm not seeing where you're seeing that it should be at a minimum of 7%.
Oh, okay. On your page 7, it says downtown B, right? You have downtown AA, downtown A, and downtown B. And I'm suggesting that this would be considered a D and below a B. So if a B is at 7, then presumably this cap rate should be higher than 7 and certainly not at 5.5. Does that not make sense to you?
Well, we have this categorized as an OFS suburban, so I was reading off the suburban B capitalization rates during my presentation. You're referring to the downtown B office capitalization rates, correct?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at here. That's correct. And just not to put too fine a point on it, but this property is clearly not in the suburbs, correct? And it wouldn't be competing with other properties in the suburbs for tenants. This is indeed a downtown heritage property, correct?
Yes, it's downtown. We categorize it as OFS because it's under 4 stories in height.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of the capitalization rate conclusions, is it a fair comment, Mr. Kupfer, that the city has not provided any sales for us to review to understand how these modeled cap rates were generated? Is that fair?
That's fair. No sales in my brief.
Okay. I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair. Thank you.
thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Just what's the
Sorry,
between
for the assessor, sorry.
It's okay. What's the difference between a suburban B and a downtown B?
Generally speaking, suburban means outside of the downtown. However, we also categorize some buildings as OFS or suburban if they're under 4 stories in height. It's a bit of a wonky naming convention, but yeah, we categorize these as OFS or suburban due to the height of the building. It's not an office tower. It's 2 stories in height.
Okay, so that's why you went with that suburban B.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairperson. Mr. Kupfer, I'm looking at the building and is there parking for the building beside it? Do you know offhand?
Just having a look at my photos here, there does appear to be surface parking beside it, and I believe there's also surface parking across the street.
Also, I think the applicant specified in that the building is a heritage building. Is this something new for you to? Do you know that if it's a heritage building?
I don't have any information on the heritage status. It's not something we actively track with our modeling assessments. I know that a lot of these older buildings in the early 1900s will have some degree of heritage status. It's not something that's going to directly impact our modeled assessment.
So you can't say one way or the other whether it's a heritage building?
No, I can't.
So if it was a heritage building, would you value it differently?
Not necessarily, no. My best comparables here are also built in the early 1900s. I would have to look at those, see if they also have some sort of heritage designation status, and then look to make an adjustment based off of that. But I haven't been presented with any market evidence to suggest that the fact that it has some heritage designation will automatically result in a lower rent or a higher cap rate.
And like you say, everything is model driven, so the vacancy rate of 11% is model driven also?
It is, yes, sir.
So just one other question. You're using a cap rate of 555. That seems to be I think fairly low for a building of this age.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Thank you. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no questions. So, Mr. Story, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so as we've established, we are at 212 McDermott. Now, Mr. Mayor, you'd asked about parking. I just want to be very clear. The parking that Mr. Cuffer mentioned across the street is not under ownership by Mayberry, and the parking that is directly adjacent is related to the nightclub next door. So there's no parking for this property. The parking that is directly adjacent is in fact related to the Palomino Club. So no parking. Just want to be very clear about that. I have visited this property many times. It is indeed a commercial art gallery. They do appraisals, they sell art, they put on exhibitions, and they do a great deal of framing. So that is what goes on. So I don't dispute that it's fine to classify it as an office, but we do have to recognize that it does have a retail flair to it, and it's open gallery space, so it's not demised in a traditional way for office. So I just want to be very clear about that. We'll get to that in my photos. It is indeed what we're going to consider a Class D office building. It is downtown, it's not in the suburbs, and it's not competing for suburban tenants. This is a very unique building with some unique features, to be certain, but it is certainly not one that would be competitive with suburban office buildings. So it is indeed, Mr. Mayor, you'd asked about the heritage status. The city of Winnipeg put it on the heritage resource list in September of 2003, and it was applied a grade 2 heritage status. There are 3 grades, and the protected elements are the main floor staircase and millwork. There's a fireplace on the 2nd floor that ought not to be altered, as well as a stained glass window. Now, part of the reason why we will adjust our cap rates by 25 basis points for heritage properties is because they receive a notice on registered on title, which effectively is tantamount to a caveat, which precludes what I'll call regular repair and maintenance work that requires a permit to be done. So heritage buildings require a separate permitting process, and the trades that are available are typically limited. So for example, for many years, there was one firm who could do the masonry work. There was one firm who would do the sash and door work. So it's effectively, to an owner, that amounts to higher repair and maintenance costs and typically longer processing times. So and that is why you'll often see folks who are averse to a heritage designation, and it's not because they're they don't want to take care of the building. They simply do not want to have all the extra administrative red tape, let's say, when trying to maintain their building. So and we've outlined that position in greater detail in our standalone cap rate study, and I will get to that in a moment. Ultimately, the potential market rent that's being applied by the city, we do not have an issue with it. We've on page 12, we've broken it down as $20 on the main floor. It's good quality space. They're running a commercial art gallery. It's quite nice. Second floor, we're using $10. It's not accessed by an elevator. It's that wooden staircase that I mentioned that is indeed heritage protected. And the basement, we are applying a rate of $5.85. The basement is where some of the framing and matting goes on. And you can see that in my photos as well. So ultimately, we're using a rent of $13.68. So a touch high, admittedly, but the quality of the interior is nice for retail, but it is not indeed set up for office. Ultimately, we're using a market rent per annum of $99,311. I don't believe that'll be in dispute, as we are slightly higher than the assessor in this instance. We have accepted the vacancy rate of 11%. That is typically below market, but we don't have a vacancy issue. We've got an owner-occupied property, so this property will either be 0% or 100% vacant, and 11% is a touch low, but we think it's fine, so we've accepted that. Similarly, we're not disputing the shortfall rate at $8 a foot. Where we do have an issue, once again, Madam Chair, is on this cap rate. We've provided you with our Altus capitalization rate study. Now, I won't go through all of it unless you'd like me to, but ultimately we've outlined, I think, very clearly our methodology, how we've derived these cap rates. We've provided you with a number of sales, and again, all of our assumptions and all of our calculations have been provided to you in full. So, for the sake of brevity, after we get through the 6 indices of sales, we can show you that and this is on page 19 of my standalone cap study, the Class C office in the downtown, the cap rates ought to range between 7.75 and 8.25. Class D should run between 8.5 and 9.5. This property would certainly be considered a Class D property. We mentioned that heritage status also brings the additional risks through the municipally imposed restrictions. We translate that to a minimum 50 basis point premium. So in this case, I've used a cap rate of 8.5% to reflect the heritage status, to reflect the age, to reflect the fact that we are downtown next to a nightclub. I haven't made an adjustment for negative external factors, but typically proximity to a nightclub may come with some nuisance behavior. Again, I haven't made an adjustment, but it is worth noting. We consider the site size and development potential. Well, this property is built at a land to building rate of 1:1, so there's no extra land, there's no parking. Of course, it's in good condition, but it is quite old. It's 1901. The configuration and layout, as I mentioned, we don't have a standard office setup in this building. We also don't have elevators. Would not be considered accessible by any stretch of the imagination. Strength of covenant is not an issue here, as it's owner occupied. And the regulatory factors, again, we have a grade 2 heritage notice on title. So we feel very, very supported in applying a cap rate of 8.5%, which in this case leads us to an indicated market value of $933,485, which we then round to $933,000. So we would respectfully submit to this board that the value ought to not exceed $933,000. The balance of my brief includes some photos, as well as Mr. Cupper quite rightly pointed out that the owner has submitted their income and expenses, and they're fully owner occupied. They're there for your perusal. You can see the building details, again, wood frame building, brick veneer, 1901. That's there for you. And then you can see the gallery space on page 22. I've been to this building many times, personally and professionally. I can warrant that is indeed exactly what it looks like on the interior. So I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, but we do respectfully submit that the value ought not to exceed $933,000 for this cycle. And with that, I thank you, and I'm open to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cupford, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Story, I'm examining your office capitalization rate study supplied by Altus,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if you could point out a comparable which you would deem to be the best or the strongest in this case relative to the subject property based on the study.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the sales that we have in here for the downtown are larger Class B office, so they would not be directly comparable without adjustment, to be certain. So I would say that the sales that we provided are intended to give the board an overview of the downtown Winnipeg office market, or sorry, of the citywide office market. But the sales that we've used in the downtown are much larger, so I don't think that they would be rightfully used as direct comparisons, but they do indicate that our range is supported. So for example, and again, this is a property right across the street at 433 Main, sold with an 818 cap. Now, that property has been converted to multi-use, but it was indeed marketed as an office building. So I mean, in terms of proximity, that would be our closest one, but in terms of its function and utility, it would be a fair bit different. So long answer to your question, I don't think there's one sale in here that would be a good fit, let's say, but I think that we have provided the board with a very good indication of the ranges that we would expect to see in the downtown, and I believe that supports our 8.5 for this property.
Okay. Thank you. You made mention of the heritage status a few times. Can you just point out if any of these sales also included heritage status?
Sure, yeah. Just see, I don't believe so. 185 Carlton, or sorry, 155 Carlton, no. The other one on Carlton, no. And 433 Main, no. So no heritage status on these, no sales with a heritage restriction.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Thank you very much. Mr. Merritt.
Yes, Madam Chairperson, Mr. Story, this building has got heritage status.
Yes, indeed.
So when you evaluate, properties with heritage status, what do you sort of look at?
Sure, that's a great question. So I love to talk about heritage property. So this is thank you for the question. Ultimately, when we have properties that were put on the list before, I never recall the exact date, but I think it was sometime in 2013, they changed the application. So they used to use a grading system, grades 1, 2, and 3, with varying degrees of severity in terms of the restrictions as to what may be done. They've now switched to a process where they apply what are called CDEs, or character defining elements. And when you have a property with a certain CDE, that means that element of that building is protected. In this case, we do have what would eventually become CDEs with the staircase that cannot be altered or removed, the stained glass window. Sorry, there's one other element here. It was main floor staircase. Oh, and the fireplace on the second floor in the old boardroom. This is the former Lake of the Woods building. So ultimately, the way that we value these, we look at the severity of the restriction, how likely it is that that will impede future development or future use or utility, and then make adjustments on that basis. And once again, with this property, we're going to the high end of our range, but I'm not distorting the value by saying, well, it ought to be a 9 cap or some such thing. But we're simply recognizing that if this were an 8.25, for example, 8.5% makes sense with the heritage designation. And I can't overstate enough that the costs that are borne by the owner when going through the heritage permitting process are higher, substantially higher than if it was going through a regular permitting process through the city of Winnipeg. So you have to use certain suppliers who are sensitive to the nature of this building. Now, this building, many years ago, I worked for the Exchange District Business Improvement Zone, so I know about some of the issues around these buildings. So, for example, when you have graffiti on a sandstone building, that is a big problem. It's very difficult to remove, and you have to use specific suppliers. If you own a regular building, you can just use anyone in the market, and those prices will typically be more competitive for those services. So ultimately, and I don't want to suggest that we're saying anything negative about heritage. We're all big supporters of heritage, but we have to recognize that the value that accrues to the greater good, to the whole, are borne by owners, and the costs are much higher. So effectively, when we see a heritage designation, and when we see those restrictions on title, and when we know that the owner will have to go through a wholly separate permitting process in order to make adjustments to their building required permits, we have to capture that somewhere, and we capture it in the cap rate. And typically it's by an adjustment of about 25 to 50 basis points, depending on the severity or the impediments to the work that need to be done.
So they're tough to evaluate if you're going to sell a heritage building,
Right.
it has a stigma.
Well,
Or-
I'm not going to say it has a stigma, but it would be a consideration. It's something that somebody would have to bake into their purchase price, knowing that there's a higher degree of risk. So if indeed the cap rate is, a required rate of return, but also a numerical representation of risk, then the risk would be higher for a property that has a heritage building than one that does not.
So you're saying that because of the heritage status, you're adding approximately a half point.
Yes, I went through this property a number of times, and I was back and forth between 8.25 and 8.5. I think 8.5 makes a great deal of sense. And again, there are other factors that may be preclusive for other users. Proximity to a nightclub is not always for everyone, let's say. So I think ultimately I was careful not to over adjust in the eyes of the market. You may very well see a greater adjustment in terms of the risk profile. But even if we are being a little bit optimistic, I think that 8.5 makes sense for this property.
I thank you, Mr. Story. I think that's all the questions I have, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just have one question. If I take the net on the city, if I take the net operating income divided by that 5.55, I do not get 1,343,459. Can somebody else do that calculation for me and confirm that?
I get 1,343,459.
Oh, geez, Louise, what the hell am I doing? Okay, I'll figure that out. Thank you.
Cool.
All right. Sorry. My question has actually been answered already. So does anybody have the need for a summary? Mr. Kupfer, Mr. Story?
None for me, thank you.
No, Madam Chair, I think I'll leave my summary to the end if that's all right, and I can sort of summarize all the properties together.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. So we can move on to the next matter on the docket. Sorry, just let me finish my note for 1 second. Okay, sorry, thank you. The next matter on the docket is number 6, and that is 191 Lombard Place. Mr. Kupfer, please proceed when you are ready.
It's file 24-2635. The roll number is 1306-0725-000. Street address of 191 Lombard Avenue. The owner is Tcon Limited. This is a commercial office building, again, located on Lombard, so we're downtown. This one is quite a bit larger than the last one we discussed. It's 13 stories in height. Built in 1911 with an effective year built of 1950. It shares the same zoning, the C character zoning. Land area is 4,786 square feet, and we have a leasable area on file of 42,544 square feet spread over those 11 stories. We have a 2025 modeled assessment of $3,980,000 for this property, which I'll recommend be confirmed today. Pages 2 through 4 of my brief show photos of the subject property and the building. You likely recognize it. It's right on the corner of Main Street and Lombard, quite well located. Page 5 of my brief indicates that we have no recent sales on this property to base our evaluation on. Page 6 of my brief has our income workup for this property. We have quite a few different smaller areas. Again, it's an 11-story building, but overall we're looking at a blended rate. Blended rate of about $9.81 over the entirety of this space. It's classified as an OFD, which is our lowest classification for downtown office. This means it gets a 14% vacancy rate, which to my knowledge is our highest vacancy rate. The 3% expenses, an $8 shortfall. And this one has a capitalization rate of 7.55%. Which is how we derive this value of $3,980,000. I've included rent comparables for you below that. I would submit that the properties on Main Street and Lombard, 221 Portage is also quite close by. These are all fairly good comparables in terms of proximity. I've included the ages built as well. They're all early 1900s buildings, similar to the subject property. Yes, and we've got a range here between about $11.50 and $17.50. Page 8 of my brief shows the income value summary. Again, only one income stream here and one classification, so it's all contained for you in one nice easy stream. Pages 9 and 10 show the same capitalization rate evidence and table that you've likely seen before. We discussed on the last property. OFD is not a subsection that gets reported from these agencies. As you can see, we've got downtown A and downtown B. The inference is that downtown C or downtown D would just slightly be a lower rent or a higher cap rate compared to OFA or OFB. Pages 11 and 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 of my brief are all the income and expense information that was submitted to us. So this is indicated to not be an owner-occupied property. Again, I haven't spoken with the owner or inspected it to verify this. Income and expenses have been submitted to us, as well as a tenant list, so we have no issues here with compliance. As well, they've included a survey of vacancy for the property. It's noted to be just over 11%. Again, we have 14% modeled. Beginning on pages 18 and onwards, I've included photographs of our comparable properties for your review and for reference. And that's all the information I have on this property. So again, we have a 2025 modeled assessment of $3,980,000 that I'm going to recommend be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions?
I do, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cupper, have you or has anyone from the city inspected this property in recent years?
I didn't pull the inspection record for you. I haven't inspected it recently. Somebody from the city has certainly been there at some point.
Okay, but the assessment today is all modeled, I think you said, is that correct?
To my knowledge, yes. Okay.
And then I guess I asked this before, but the effective year, is that the year that's that the model is using to develop the assessment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and heritage designation, are you aware that this property also has a heritage designation on it?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You mentioned the vacancy a couple of times, and you've quite rightly included the history of vacancy, but are you aware that in March of 2023, right before the reference date, Burke's very publicly announced that they were leaving the main floor retail space?
No, I have no knowledge of that.
Okay. All right. And did you review the actual leases in place to confirm that your model was in line?
No, I haven't done a site-specific analysis for this property.
Okay. Just go through your rents very quickly. I had to look at a few of them. The Curry building, that's your first one, that's 221. that's a very short lease. Can we agree that that's a short lease? And only 3 years?
It's a 3-year lease, yes.
Yeah. And that would be typically be shorter than what we would expect to see in downtown office leases. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, you'd hope to land somebody for 5.
At a minimum, yeah. Okay, did you confirm that these were all indeed net leases, or could some of these be gross?
Someone from our office would have done an analysis on these rent comparables and done their best to confirm that they are net leases.
Okay, so then you're not aware then that the comp 5, that's a gross rent?
I haven't been presented with any information to confirm that.
And index number 2, is that a data center?
Comparable number 2,
Yes.
I'm not aware of which tenant is located within it.
Okay, right. I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, do you have any questions?
I have none. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you. I just had one question. You've made reference several times to it being an 11-story building. However, on the property description on your first page, it's listed as 13 stories.
I was reading the wall height, not the number of stories. You are
Oh,
correct. It's 13 stories, not 11.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for clarifying. That was my only question. So, Mr. Story, please go ahead when you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. So here we are on the corner of Lombard and Main. This is the Union Trust Tower. It does indeed have a heritage designation. It was built in 1911. It is 13 stories. It's a Class D building. Now it's own character, and it's the let's see here. Oh, sorry, there's a typo. It says Marshall Wells Warehouse. That's another property we'll look at today. But it's a Class 2 heritage building, and it was applied that designation in 1983. The main floor foyer and lobby and the main floor banking hall are the elements that are protected. And that is going to be something of an issue, let's say. We all know that Burke's came back downtown. I think it was in about 2007 or 2008. And right before the reference date in March of 2023, they announced that they would be leaving. That's a very, very difficult space to lease. It is still vacant. Now, the issue that we have, obviously, is that the space that Burke's was in, which is reasonably like a luxury retailer, obviously, based on their what they do. Now we have to find a tenant who can find utility in that protected main floor banking hall. So that's an issue that we should make sure we're aware of as we review the property. The subject lease is in place. Calculate a potential net rent at $349,968. Now you'll note on my page 12, we did include the Burke's lease at 1572 for that main floor retail. However, it was known at the reference date that they would be vacating. However, we've included it, and we can see here that the rents are quite low, but that is what we would expect to see in an OFC or OFD. We would typically, by the BOMA standard, they would suggest that this would be a building competing for tenants, requiring functional space at rents below the average for the area. In reviewing this file in past years, I noticed that in unit 1200 in the previous cycle, that unit was vacant. Our practice is to apply what we believe to be a market rent to those spaces going forward. So in that case, we applied a rent of $8.50. We can now see, now that the window has opened up, that there was a lease that was indeed signed at $8.05. So the rents are reasonably low once we net them out, leading us once again to $349,968, and that is supported by the actuals. The vacancy rate of 14% is not disputed, though we do note that this property in 2021 was 16.7% vacant. In 2022, it was 8.69% vacant, but it was certainly known before the reference date and leading right up to the reference date that Burke's would be vacating that space. And again, that's, I'm going to suggest to you that's a key space because it is the high exposure storefront retail space, but it's heritage protection and it's been very, very difficult to lease. It's still vacant. So, and Burke's accounts for 8% of the gross leasable area. So we have to consider that when we're reviewing the property. Again, we look to our capitalization rate conclusions, which again are summarized for you on page 14. Downtown office, we suggest ought to run between 8.5 and 9.5% in terms of the cap rates. And when we look at some of the factors that influence cap rates, so for this one, once again, site size, we have a 1-to-1 land to building. This property does not have any parking. Obviously, it's not required, but we have to recognize that. The building condition and age life, it does indeed, it's quite old as a historic building. The strength of covenant in terms of longer leases, stronger tenancies, those should reduce investor risk. Now, we don't have that here. We typically have, again, what we're calling the types of tenants who are looking for functional space, and generally that will equate to a weaker covenant. The income forecast is negative at the reference date. We know that Burke's is leaving, and we know that that's going to be a difficult space to lease. And of course, we have the regulatory factor of the heritage status. So in this case, I think we've been quite. We might be a little bit light on the cap rate at 8.5, given all of the factors that we've considered here, but ultimately the resulting value is supportable and makes sense. So on page 15, you have my workup. I apologize. The building age says 1929. I'm not sure why. It should say 1911. Ultimately, Madam Chair, we come to a value of $2,870,000, and that's again based on an NOI of $243,949. Capitalized at 8.5% leads us to $2,869,992. Again, $2,870,000 is the value that we're requesting today. The balance of the brief has the income and expense submissions that were submitted to the city. They have indeed informed our position today. I've included some marketing images, giving you a sense of the present physical condition of the space. That starts on page 27. You can see this would be considered basic finish. Then when we get to page 30, you can see the interior of the former Burke space, which again is going to be drawing from a limited tenant pool. So that should give us some pause and should be tantamount to a higher risk. However, we haven't made an adjustment. We feel very supported at 8.5%. And once again, we're suggesting $2,870,000 to the board today. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kupfer. Do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
Just a couple, thank you. Primarily concerning your page 12, Mr. Story, the potential market rent that's been calculated. Are there any, sorry, I apologize if I missed it, but are there any comparable leases or comparable properties you've relied on for this valuation?
No, for the purpose of this valuation, Mr. Kupfer, we believe that the rents in place are the best indicator of market. So the market for this building would indeed be the rents that are in place, and we can see that by rents that were signed. Many of them are signed within a period that's quite close to the reference period. They're not older leases. They look to be well in line with what we'd expect. And as I mentioned, the unit 1200 where we had previously forecasted $8.50 as a viable market rent, we see that the actual performance is $8.05. So I want to be careful not to use rents from other buildings and then adjust them to the point where they become distortive. In this instance, these rents are the best indicator for the market of this building.
So if I'm reading this correctly, and I'll even exclude the Burke's rent here, what's been reported or what's been calculated here ranges from roughly $3 a foot to $12 a foot, depending on the space that's been marked. Can you comment on why such a drastic variance in the rents in this building?
Sure. Well, it's basically what we have here, and you'll see this, and I'm sure you're aware of this. You'll see in a number of these older buildings, the rents are typically gross. So we have to net them out to determine what is actually collected by the owner. So I didn't mention it here, or I didn't ask you about it, but the actual shortfall in this building is $12.89. So when we net out the actual rents to bring them to net, that's the precise calculation. So it would be, from my perspective, distortive to use anything that is higher without adjustments. So again, our position is that these rents are market for this building.
Okay, thank you, sir. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, do you have any
I
questions?
have none, Madam Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. Nor do I. Is there a need for a summary from either party?
None for me, thank you.
Not at this stage, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest before moving on to the next matter that we take a brief recess. Say just a quick break for everybody. Shall we, you guys need 5 or 10 minutes?
Just 5.
5 minutes? Okay. See you guys in a few minutes. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. All right. The next matter on our docket is 65 Rory Street. Mr. Kupfer, sorry, please proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's file number 24-2516. The roll number is 1306075350. The street address, as you've indicated, is 65 Rory Street, not to be confused with the owner, which is 140 Bannatyne Limited. This is a commercial office building. Again, we're still located downtown, of course. This one's right on the corner of Bannatyne and Rory Street. This one is 3 stories in height. It has the same character zoning that we've been reviewing all day today. Larger land area on this property, it's 22,468 square feet, and a leasable area for the building of 39,052 square feet. We have a 2025 modeled assessment for this property of $6,532,000, which I'm going to recommend be confirmed today. Pages 2, 3, and 4 of my brief provide plenty of photos and maps for your reference. You can see there is parking, a parking lot included with this property. So we have 2 streams on it. Both this is the stream for the office component as well as for the parking component. We have 39 parking stalls on file. Page 6 of my brief begins our income value work up here. As you can see, we have the spaces broken down with 1 restaurant stream and the rest just being C2 standard finish. We have a blended rate here, which I'll quickly calculate for you, of about $13.13 spread out over the whole space. We have this classified as OFC rather than OFD, likely due just to the building being a little bit newer than some of the other properties that we've discussed today. This one was built in the late 20s rather than the early 1900s. With that comes our modeled 13% vacancy, 3% expenses, and in this case a $10 shortfall, and a capitalization rate of 6.85%. This gives you a capitalized value of $5,575,000. The next page in my brief, page 7, shows the parking stream, which is separate from the office stream. This is how we modeled these buildings. Again, we have 39 stalls on file, $92 net per stall, giving us an annual rate of just over $43,000 and a 4.5% cap rate on just the parking component of that income. And I've provided comparable properties, comparable leases, and comparable parking properties in support of both of these valuations. Page 8 of my brief shows the income value summary where these 2 streams are combined. Again, everything here is under 1 classification, so it's just a merging of the rents, a merging of the capitalization rates, and an addition of those 2 rates, which brings you to the total market value of $6,532,000. Pages 9 and 10 of my brief include the same capitalization rate info that we've been submitting for all of these properties. Again, OFC or a C downtown market isn't something that's specific to these rates or to these tables. We do have downtown A and B, however, for your reference. Beginning on page 11 onwards is the income and expense information that's been submitted for this property. Again, we haven't done a site-specific analysis of this property. This has all been model-driven and is being supported based on our comparable rents. And beyond that, beginning on page 16, I've included just some photos of our comparable properties for your reference if you're interested in seeing how they compare to the subject. And that is all the information I have on this property. So again, 2025 modeled assessment of $6,532,000, I believe should be confirmed, and I'm open to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Kupfer, I think you said this is all modeled and there's been no consideration to the actual reported performance based on the I&E submissions. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It says that there are 3 buildings, but I mean, typically it would be considered 2 buildings here. Does that affect the model at all? It's in your page 1.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. And sorry, have you visited this property for the purpose of this exercise today?
I have not.
Okay. Okay, and then just very quickly, we're not worlds apart on rent. I'm using 500 here to 512, but just want to go through these very quickly. The comparables that you've used. Now, the first one, obviously, that's a very short rent. Is that fair?
Just under 2 years, yes.
Yeah. Okay, and then that 491 Portage, is that the U of W Student Service Center?
I haven't marked who the tenants are for my comparables, so I won't be able to comment on that.
Okay, but if it was, do you think they might pay a premium to be right next door to the University of Winnipeg? This is in the Rice Building.
Again, I can't really comment on if they're paying a premium or not.
Okay, 294 Portage, that would be a gross lease, correct?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. But I think you said you didn't review the other ones. Did you review these to ensure that they were net?
No, someone in our office would have done this analysis. I didn't personally review these.
Okay. And that cap rate, once again, based on, I apologize, we're asking the same question over and over, but there's some of the same issues. That cap rate would not consider the heritage designation on this property, to your knowledge. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Okay. Okay, and the parking, now ultimately we just have a concern with the parking cap rate. Can you tell us how the city model derived a cap rate of 4.5% on the surface parking?
Generally speaking, our cap rates for surface parking tend to come in lower. As I think you've noted in one of our previous presentations, risk plays a factor in the cap rate which is developed. And our model views these surface parking lots, these largely unimproved lots with a lower risk factor, which is why they end up with a lower capitalization rate. Beyond that, I don't have any specific information for you.
Okay, I understand that, but no sales to show why it's 4.5, for example.
No parking lot sales in my brief, no.
Okay. All right, and I think that now this property, now you've included the on page 12, you do have the income and expense. Skip the Dishes was the key tenant in this property, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And they have since vacated, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I think I'll leave my comments for my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt.
Hello, great, thank you.
Nor do I. So, Mr. Story, please proceed with your presentation when you are ready.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So once again, we are in the East Exchange, 65 Rory. We have a number of photos. They're basically the same photos that you'll see in the assessor's brief. On page 8, we do include the heritage designation information. So this is the former Northern Electric building, and it is a class 3 heritage designation. So slightly different from the previous, which I believe were both class 2. So again, any alteration or repair is regulated through the heritage permitting process, which I've mentioned a number of times now. So we have to consider that from our perspective in the cap rate to be certain. So ultimately, we look to the actual rents in place. This is on page 13 of my brief. You'll note that those first two, those are considered by the owner to be unusable or unleasable space at the lower level. We've applied a storage rent or a basement rent of, well, it's higher than a storage rent, but $585. Those are the adjustments that we've made. We are coming to a market rent per annum of $500,856. The assessor's at $512. Our blended rent calculates to $1,223. Again, that is going to be depressed slightly by those lower level rents. They shouldn't have the same rent as the main level. You can see that there is a fresh rent on the main floor at $13, and that is for the Mennonite Central Committee. So I mentioned skip the dishes and the history of this property. If you go far back enough, it's of course it's the former Marble Club on the main floor, which then became Wise Guys, which then became Alive in the district. So it was typically a nightclub on that main floor, which was then converted for the key tenants Skip the Dishes. They've since vacated, and now the main floor tenant is it's a social enterprise of the Mennonite Central Committee, and it's a small coffee shop. Was there yesterday. So that is what is going on in this building. We feel that our blended rent of $1,223 makes sense. So these are good rents that are very close to the reference date. In some cases, you can see it March of 23, August of 2020, March of 23 again. And those rents are typically should fall somewhere between $12 and $14. And with that, again, that $585 on the lower level brings that average down slightly, but $1,223 for this building makes sense. We've included some lease comparables to show you that the rents in this building are actually appear to be outperforming what we've looked at on Portage, Carleton, and Market. You can go through these if you'd like, but ultimately we feel that the rents in place are a good indicator of value. We talked about this on Lombard. So if the rents are higher than what we're seeing in the indices, we don't simply go for the lower rent. We're using what is actually in place and what is supportable. So in this case, on page 13, our calculation of $500,856 makes good sense, and we do believe that is well supported. We've used a vacancy rate of 14%. Again, we had 15 initially, but I adjusted to 14% in order to capture the any additional risk should be captured in the capitalization rate. We do note that there is a history of vacancy in this building, and if you analyze the financials, you can see that the owner at December 1 of 2022 was reporting to the city that the total occupied space was 69.55%. Vacancy was 17.35 and unleasable was 13.1. We've not used those figures. We've gone to what I'll call a market vacancy at 14%. And once again, we've baked in any of the additional risk to our capitalization rate. Once again, we're using a cap rate for this property of 7.5%. Mr. Cuffer is quite right. The initial build was in 1928. They added a couple of stories later on. It's a bit of a well, it's a heritage building that had 2 stories added to the top floors. So we do consider that in our analysis. So where we've typically used 8.5%, I think we're very reasonable, if not a touch light, given the history and the inherent risk of downtown OFCs with exposure to vacancies. So ultimately, we've used rents that are commensurate with what's being reported. We've used a vacancy that is commensurate with market at 14%, even though the subject's vacancy is higher. And one might expect it to continue to be higher. And then we've used a capitalization rate of 7.5%. So on the OFC portion of the income stream, it's broken down for you on page 17 of my brief. That leads us to an indicated market value of the OFC stream of $4,806,198. That figure, once rounded, of course, is $4,806,000. In terms of the parking lot, we don't have a dispute about the NOI. We're simply suggesting that the cap rate of 4.5% is too low. I've provided you with a fairly lengthy downtown parking study. This is sort of a newer addition this year. We have a very thorough parking study, but it includes some sales because Mr. Comfort has quite rightly pointed out, it's difficult to determine what the cap rates might be for sold parking lots. We don't see a lot of activity in the market, but we do have one on Pioneer that's sold with a 5.08 cap. So ultimately, our position this cycle is that the cap rates for parking lots in the downtown ought to be 5.55%. Now, there is a good argument to be made that the cap rate on the main holding ought to be applied to the parking as they are related. However, we've, in the interest of narrowing our issues and following the methodology that the city has put forth, we are capitalizing the parking income with a lower capitalization rate, and in this case, we're using 5.5% based on our downtown parking study. So if you follow me once again, please, to page 14. Page 17 of the brief, you can see the summarized value that includes the parking. The parking value then becomes, with our 5.5 cap and our NOI $43,056, becomes $782,836. When added to the OFC income, we come to an indicated market value of the entire asset of $5,589,034. We of course round that to $5,589,000, and you'll see that the effect of adding that 5.5 cap to the parking lot gives us an overall blended cap rate of 7.22%, which I think might be a touch low, but ultimately the resulting value is fair and quite reasonable in my mind. So ultimately, Madam Chair, we're suggesting a value of $5,589,000, and again, that's based on using the actual rents in place as good indicators, a market vacancy, and a cap rate that considers the site-specific issues related to the property, and a cap rate of the parking lot of 5.5 as opposed to 4.5%. So once again, our request is $5,589,000, and with that, I am open to your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
I have no questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight?
No, thank you.
Mr. Merritt?
No, thank you.
Nor do I. Is there a need for a summary from either party on this matter?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, that brings us to the next matter on the docket, which is 90 Market Avenue. So Mr. Kupfer, please proceed when you're ready.
This is file number 24-1948. The roll number is 130-9906-9130. The street address, as you've indicated, is 90 Market Avenue. The owner is CFH Incorporated. This is again a downtown office building. This one is on Market Avenue, effectively on the corner of Market and Bertha Street, just kind of tucked away off the river. This is a one-story commercial office building constructed in 1951. This has the D downtown zoning, downtown living zoning applied to it. A large land area, 39,220 square feet, with a leasable area of only 14,759 square feet. 44 parking stalls, all outdoor, and a 2025, again, modeled assessed value of $3,914,000 for the 2025 cycle, which I'm going to recommend be confirmed today. Pages 2 and 3 of my brief show some photos and maps of the subject property. As you can see, it's not. It's a bit of an odd shape here. As you can see, again, access to it is right off of Market and Bertha by that corner there. And it's all on one story. So page 4 of my brief shows no recent sales for the subject property for us to rely on here. Page 5 of my brief shows the parking stream that's been allocated by our model here. Again, 44 stalls, using all the same rates here as the last property that we discussed, $92 net per stall, and that 4.5% capitalization rate for an income value for this parking stream of just over $1 million, and all the same comparables have been supplied. Page 6 of my brief shows the income stream for the office. Like I indicated earlier, because it's all on one story, despite it being downtown, we do categorize this as an OFS or suburban office under 4 stories. The rents that have been calculated for each rate are shown there, slightly different for each space. The blended rate being assigned here is about $14.26 by my calculation over the entire space. Our model's applied an 11% vacancy rate, 3% for the expenses, and $8 for the shortfall. Everything pretty consistent there. And then a capitalization rate of just under 6%, 5.95. Again, being applied by our model. Page 7 of my brief shows comparables for the office. Comparables for the parking stream were available on page 5. And then page 8 shows the combined income value summary, similar to the last property that we discussed, just an addition of these two values, bringing us to the total income value of $3,914,000. Pages 9 and 10 of my brief, it's all capitalization rate info. Again, we have this categorized as a suburban office. Pages 11 onward show the income and expense information. It's been submitted by the owner, CFH. They do list themselves on the income statement here on my page 15. So I would say that it's been indicated to us that this is partially owner occupied, but not fully. So there are other tenants in the building. And then page 17 onward are simply supporting evidence, photos of the comparables which have been submitted. That's all the information I have on this property. So again, we're looking at a combined total income value of $3,914,000 for 2025, and I'm going to recommend that that be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions?
I do. Mr. Cupper, have you visited this property?
I have not.
Okay. And this model, or sorry, this assessment is completely model derived. Is that fair?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And okay, so and again, not to belabor, but the cap rate used for the parking lot, that's modeled. There's no support for that in your evidence. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and then if we go to page 6, the rents that are being used are based on OFS. So those would be, am I correct in assuming that those are the types of rents that we might expect to see in suburban office?
No, I think they're supported by, well, yeah, the comparables here that have been submitted. There aren't many suburban downtown comparables, unfortunately. I don't have any information on if the rents are substantially different for suburban office outside or inside downtown.
Okay, so sorry, but in terms of the model, when we're looking to downtown rents, would you not agree with me that the downtown office rents are, as a general comment, are lower than the suburban counterpart? Is that fair?
I would say greatly depends on what area of the city you're looking at. Some areas could very well rent for more, and some suburban areas would undoubtedly rent for less.
Okay, but these that you've provided on page 7 on Pembina, Niagara, and Waverly, these are not competing the downtown. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay, and the first one, that's a daycare, correct?
I'm not sure who the tenant is.
I know that because that's our client. And then Com4, that's an owner occupied building. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, and Com3 is a school, correct?
Again, I'm not aware of who the tenants are.
Okay. Okay, it's fine. I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Ms. Knight, do you have any questions?
Just why did you use comparables out Pembina, that end of town, and not comparables downtown?
Well, there aren't a lot of suburban office properties downtown.
Mhm.
Like I said, it gets classified that based on the size of the building. So I would agree that these aren't the strongest comparables which have been supplied on page 7, as
Okay.
all of them are pretty far in terms of proximity from
Yeah.
the subject.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Merritt, do you have any question?
I have none, Madam Chairperson. Thank you.
Nor do I. So, Mr. Story, please proceed when you're ready.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so here we are at 90 Market Avenue. This is a one-story Class C office. Again, 90 Market is, if you follow Market to its very end, you pass the, okay, that would be 112 Market is the Saddlery Restaurant. This is just beyond that, and it's sort of tucked into a little nook in there. So it suffers from a lack of visibility. I was there for the purpose of this assignment. I took some photos. You can't get photos of it from street maps. It's very difficult because they're because of its sighting. So just want to point that out. Ultimately, the rental income that's being collected, or that was being collected, is $137,961. Mr. Cupper is quite correct that CFH is indeed on the rent roll, but we have to adjust that to market. So on page 12, we've shown you our adjustments. So the vacant spaces, we've applied a rent of $15. Those two spaces are very small. They're 690 feet and 338 feet. So based on economies of scale, they ought to be slightly higher than what we'd expect for a more typical space. So the CFH space, we've adjusted to $13 per foot. You can see the balance of those leases they're ranging between 1043 and 1263. However, I do note that they are month to month. So we don't have a very strong covenant, let's say. And I know that the expectations for this property based on historic asks are our rent at $11.93 might be a touch high, but I think it's supported by market. At the bottom of page 12, I've included some rental indicators. Once again, those are indicating a median of $13 and an average of $12.28. So I think we're right in range at $11.93 for this property. Again, those other properties that we're looking at in our rental indices do not have the same degree of exciting issues, let's say, but they are a bit older. So I think on balance, that average of 12.28 makes a lot of sense with our 11.93, and when contrasted to what the owner has as an expectation of rents in this property, I think we're well in line, not dead on. The vacancy rate of 11% should not be disputed, I don't believe. Then ultimately, we're just getting to a cap rate argument. We're not considering this a suburban office. This is indeed a mid-50s build in the Exchange District. It's certainly competing for downtown tenants, the types of tenants who would find utility in a downtown space. So ultimately, we're applying a cap rate of 7.25% to the office stream. Again, that's supported by our cap rate study and some of the comments that we've made today. This one is not heritage, so I don't want to mislead. The others have been, this one is not. We've included the parking income as an adjustment, but that is indeed based on the same NOI applied by the city. But once again, using a 5.5 cap, I think that ultimately the cap rate for this parking should likely, in the eyes of the market, be applied the same cap rate as the main holding. But once again, we've used 5.5 in order to isolate that income stream in the same manner that the city assessor has performed the exercise. So that leads us to an adjustment of 883,200. So our value that we come to for the parking and for the building is 2,755,859, which we then round to 2,756,000. The balance of the brief includes the statements. You can see that they're suggesting that their average vacancy is 10.83%. So once again, that supports that 11%. The rental income is 137,961, and we've used something higher, obviously, to bring it to market. And then you can also see on page 24 that they're suggesting that those tenants are month to month, which is not, from an owner's perspective, that should give you some pause, some concern. So there's a good argument to be made that the cap rate ought to be higher, but I think ultimately we're supported at 7.25%, and the resulting value of 2,756,000 makes sense from our perspective. And we do respectfully submit that value be adjusted for the 2025 realty cycle. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Ms. Knight?
There's a difference in the parking stalls between yours and the cities. So which is actually correct?
It's a good question. You know what? I didn't count them, but we're using the same NOI, so it shouldn't make a difference. But you know what? It's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to go and count them out and determine.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
No.
Mr. Merritt?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, nor do I. So, is there a need for a summary from either party?
No summary for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just very quickly, Madam Chair, just thank you all for hearing our concerns today. I just want to point out in summary that the assessment department has not provided sales to provide cap rate conclusions for these properties. And it's also become apparent that properties that have specific issues that fall outside of the norm, it would appear, at least from my perspective, that the model has a hard time capturing those issues. So if we're talking about enhanced vacancy, if we're talking about the heritage notice on title, that has to be captured somewhere. So I think that Altus has been very, very transparent with you. We've provided you with our standalone studies for both the office properties and for the parking. And I believe that the values that we proposed here today are supported. And of course, it's our position that we should not be using suburban metrics to value or to review downtown properties. Clearly, downtown has its own ecosphere in terms of economics, and it also has its own challenges and opportunities. So I would respectfully submit that the values that we've submitted here today are supported. And once again, thank you for your time today.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We have heard all the items scheduled, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. I will go take us offline, Madam Chair.
Thank you.